This is a video in the series of videos I'm making for a class I teach at ASU, PHI 328, History of Ancient Philosophy. And here we are at the syllabus, and we've been thinking about Aristotle, so let's scroll down to the lecture notes, click on them, go down to the section on Aristotle. There it is. Now, we've looked in the past at the first 5 of these lectures, and our strategy in general has been to think about Aristotle in relation to Plato. He comes to Plato's academy as a teenager and um, stays there until Plato dies. And we've been thinking that in his written work, what Aristotle does is accept the broad outlines of what he learned in the academy, but try to fix it up in various ways by removing what he regards as its excesses and mistakes. And in particular, we've been thinking about that in relation to in relation to a dialogue called the Timaeus. The Timaeus is a late Platonic dialogue, probably written not too long after Aristotle entered the academy. And in it, we have a kind of general picture of reality. And we've been thinking about how Aristotle reacts to that. And we've seen one clear instance of Aristotle accepting the general picture, but rejecting the details. So natural bodies in the Timaeus are explained, their existence is explained in terms of forms. And Aristotle accepts that general idea. He thinks natural bodies are forms in matter, but Aristotle rejects the existence of these forms as Timaeus lays it out. Aristotle thinks that these forms are in matter and cannot exist apart, right? Aristotle thinks, as we saw, that they are organizations of the matter that explain why it is that something can behave like a member of the kind. It has the behavior that defines the kind. And so that's an instance of Aristotle thinking that Plato's onto something, accepting the general picture but rejecting the details. And the other point that we've been thinking about is the teleology in the Timaeus, right? In the Timaeus, we have a kind of teleological perspective on things. Things are the way they are because a craftsman, a divine craftsman, makes them like that in order to have them be like him as much as possible, and his existence is supposedly supremely good. Let's go down to the lecture here and take a look. So here's a passage in which, right, we're told what I just said, and over here we get an explanation for our sense of sight, right? So one of the things that human beings can do is that they can perceive their environment. In particular, they have eyes, and Plato thinks that the reason we are like this is because the our eyes are part of a kind of sequence of cognitive states that make us have thoughts that make our existence better, because they make our existence like the existence of what he refers to here as the God. And so why do we have a sense of sight? Well, because it makes us better. How does it make us better? Well, it's part of a sequence of thinking, um, which he describes here, in which we have thoughts that make us like the God, and in this way, our sense of sight is beneficial to us. Now, Aristotle, as we saw when we started thinking about On the Soul, where he tells us that that in living natural bodies, the form is a soul, and in particular, in the case of human beings, one thing that the soul does is it organizes material so that human beings develop a certain way as they change from children into adults. They acquire a reason, and this benefits them, Aristotle thinks, for um, um, roughly, it's going to turn out for roughly the reason that we have in here, that Plato thinks in the Timaeus. But what Aristotle doesn't have, he doesn't have the divine maker. And so he doesn't think that the human race is something that some maker brought into existence. He thinks, as we've seen, that human beings are forms in matter, and that these forms are the organization of the matter so that there's something that behaves in the specific ways that human beings do. The form in this way is the starting point of change and staying unchanged. And one thing that the form does, it organizes the material so that when human beings are children, they start out having sense impressions, and that these sense impressions lead eventually in the process of induction, lead eventually to the acquisition of reason. And this reason is beneficial for us. And somehow, right, this form has to be for this. And what we haven't seen yet is why that's true for Aristotle. And what we're missing is his argument for what he describes as the, the first unmovable mover. Now, the argument, we get the argument in the Metaphysics, Aristotle's Metaphysics. The Metaphysics is a collection of books that in the organization of the corpus that stems from Andronicus, these books sit on the library shelf, so to speak, in between the physical books and the physical works and the ethical works, right? Remember that the Aristotelian corpus is divided into logical works, followed by physical works, followed by ethical works. And so the books that constitute the metaphysics, they're a bit of a counterexample. They fit in between the physical works and the ethical works. And in the metaphysics, we have Aristotle and pursuing, among other things, first philosophy, right? So in the physical works, he's pursuing second philosophy. And in metaphysics, first philosophy, he's thinking about some of the things that have to be true, some of the presuppositions that assumptions that he's making in physics. And one of them is that there is change. And Aristotle is going to give us the explanation for this truth in his argument for the unmovable first mover. And the argument's kind of complicated, so let's try to go through it a little slowly. One premise is that there's no first or last moment of time, right? For any moment of time in the past, there was some moment before it. And for any moment of time in the future, there's some moment after it. And Aristotle thinks that time is an attribute of change. His idea is that there couldn't be time without change. That doesn't make sense, he thinks. Time is a kind of measurement of change. So when we put these two premises together, that time is an attribute of change, and that there's no first or last moment of time, then what we always have is a kind of everlasting sequence of changes that are occurring. And Aristotle thinks we need a cause for that sequence. And he thinks that cause must itself be free from change. And this cause he thinks is the unmovable first mover. And it's going to take the place of the divine maker in Plato's Timaeus. Now, there's a kind of picture of how, starting from the unmovable first mover, we get change, and that change trickles down from what Aristotle thinks of as the heavens down to us here on Earth. He thinks there's a kind of outermost sphere, that the universe as we live in it has an outermost sphere with Earth at its center. Now, we don't think this anymore, but Aristotle thought that the stars, what he called what were then called the fixed stars, right? If we look up, we can see them appearing to revolve, right? To rotate on an axis that runs through the Earth. And this is going to be the outermost sphere of the universe. And Aristotle thinks that these stars, these fixed stars, what he calls the fixed stars are opposed to the wandering stars. The wandering stars are, for the ancients, the planets, because the planets do not, they seem to have a different motion than this rotation motion. We can get a picture of it down here, right? They appear. So from our perspective on Earth, a planet seems to move like this against the background of the rotation of the fixed stars. And so Aristotle thinks that these stars, why do they move in the circular fashion that they do? He thinks that what's going on is that is how their existence permits them to become like the unmovable first mover. So the unmovable first mover is a teleological cause. It causes something to happen without itself moving or changing. Other things change to be like it, and that this happens first of all with these stars, and other heavenly bodies have other explanations of what's going on. And we're not going to talk about it in this video, but you can click here to see some idea of how this is all supposed to work in Aristotle. Okay. Now, what's important for us is that we can begin to see how it is that the forms of natural bodies are not just organizations of matter, rather they're organizations for the sake of an existence that's like the first unmovable mover's existence. And so what we have here in Aristotle is an example of teleology without the divine craftsman that we have in the Timaeus. Now we, obviously don't find this to be very plausible. And if we ask ourselves what's changed, it looks like the primary thing that's changed is we no longer are so ready to insist that regularity must be explained in terms of something intelligent. That was a Greek thought that gets challenged to a certain extent in the Inquirers into Nature, but it never gets overturned. Plato doesn't overturn it, right? You can see that with the picture in the Timaeus. And although Aristotle tries to fix up what he thinks are mistakes, he too accepts this general idea. And so that's our second instance of Aristotle reacting to the picture of reality in the Timaeus, right? He accepts the teleology, but not the divine maker.